Now in this part we will be talking about the nephron and the blood vessels that surround the nephron. And here you can see a mold of these blood vessels. So the kidneys have a very extensive blood supply. Now here, this is the structure of the nephron. And the nephron, again, is that structural and functional unit of the kidney. It is made out of that corpuscle. And from the corpuscle, there are tubes that extend beyond that. And the tubes are the proximal convoluted tubules, and then the nephron loop. So there's a descending limb followed by an ascending limb. And then the distal tubules, or the distal convoluted tubules, and then the collecting duct to collect urine and spill that urine into the minor calyx and major calyx and so on until it reaches the outside of the body. So as we mentioned, the nephrons are your functional units. Each kidney is about 1 million of these little tiny units, and each nephron is made out of two parts, the renal corpuscle and the renal tubules. The renal corpuscle, that is where the very first step of urine formation is going to happen, and that first step is known as filtration. The renal corpuscle is made out of a glomerular capsule that surrounds a collection of capillaries known as the glomerulus. So let us take a look at what the renal corpuscle looks like. Here again is the capsule, the glomerular capsule, also known as Bowman's capsule, and these are the capillaries on the inside. So you'll find an afferent arteriole bringing blood into the capsule, and then that arteriole is going to branch and into what is known as a tuft of capillaries or a network of capillaries, and then the blood will exit through the efferent arteriole. If you look at the capillaries, they don't look like they're red because they are actually covered by cells. These cells are known as podocytes. The podocytes have what look like these finger-like projections, and those projections are known as pedicels. In between those projections are little tiny slits, and plasma with anything that is small enough to be filtered out will actually be filtered into this space known as the capsular space, again, to start making urine. So basically, we'll talk about, exact steps of urine formation, but the first step again is filtration, and filtration is going to happen right in the renal corpuscle. One thing to keep in mind while looking at these blood vessels is that the afferent arteriole has a bigger diameter than the efferent arteriole. That means that the blood pressure going in is a lot more than the pressure leaving, or the amount of blood going in is more than the amount of blood going out. That means that inside of these capillaries, that is going to help maintain a high pressure in those capillaries, and that's what is going to help with the filtration process. So we'll get more into those details when we get into the steps of urine formation. Now, going beyond the corpuscle, you can see here the proximal tubule, and those are going to make the second part of the nephron, which are your tubular system. So from the proximal tubule down to the nephron loop, the descending followed by the ascending loop. The loop is also known as the loop of Henle, and then off to the distal tubules. From the distal tubules, several of these distal tubules are going to empty the filtrate into the collecting ducts, and then from the collecting ducts, the urine will be filtered into will be dumped into the minor calyx. We've already talked about the structure of the nephron. Now for the renal blood vessels, the kidneys, obviously because they have to filter blood, they have an extensive blood supply. So the renal arteries enter the kidney through the hilum, and then they start branching in order to surround the nephrons in all of these tubules. So I'm actually going to go to the picture to explain the renal blood vessels. So here you could see the renal arteries, which are direct branches off of the aorta. And then the artery is going to start dividing into what are known into these interlobar arteries. Interlobar arteries pass between the pyramids until it reaches the top of the pyramid and it arches above it, and that is known as the arcuate artery. And then off of the arcuate artery, you'll find several branches going into the cortex, and those are known as the cortical radiate arteries. Now that cortical radiate artery will become the afferent arteriole entering into the glomerulus. So here you can see the afferent arteriole becoming the glomerulus, and then exits as the efferent. That efferent arteriole, now going back to this picture, that efferent arteriole will surround the loop, will surround the proximal convoluted tubule and so on, and those are known as your peritubular capillaries. Now that all of that oxygen was being used, we need to gather the venous blood, and we do so through these cortical radiate veins, draining into the arcuate veins that drain into the interlobar veins, and then the interlobar vein will drain into the renal vein. Here you can see again the blood vessels of the nephron, the afferent bringing blood in, breaking down into that glomerulus, and then the blood will gather back out into the efferent, and that efferent tubule will start surrounding the tubular system, and we call those the peritubular capillaries. Now that we know what a nephron is, we have two different kinds of nephrons. The structures are the same. They differ in where they are in the kidney. So the majority of the nephrons are all the way on the top of the cortex, and those are known as cortical nephrons. These have shorter nephron loops. Okay, and again, those are the majority of our nephrons. A small percentage of the nephrons are deeper in the cortex, very close to the medulla, and we call those the juxta medullary nephrons. Juxta means neighboring or very close by, and that's where the name comes from because of their anatomical position, being very close to the medulla. These are extremely important in the regulating the water and electrolyte balance and the concentration of urine. So if our body needs to concentrate the urine or dilute the urine, these juxtamedullary nephrons are the ones that are extremely important in performing that function. Now, the juxtamedullary nephrons have an apparatus known as the juxtamedullary apparatus. So what is that apparatus and what does it do? Well, it regulates the secretion of renin, and renin is a hormone that is going to be important in regulating how much water do we lose in urine. Now, that apparatus is found in this area right here. So the ascending limb of the nephron loop, the very top portion of it is found between the efferent and the efferent arterioles. So you can see it right here. That is the top of the ascending limb, found in between the afferent and the efferent arterioles. You can see that there are some cells here extending that are found in the ascending limb, and those cells are known as the macula densa cells, while other cells are found in the smooth muscle fibers of the afferent arteriole, and those are known as the juxtamedullary cells. Here again, you can see those cells again. So again, your macula densa are these cells that are found in the ascending limb, and those are responsible for detecting any change in the osmolarity of blood, while the juxtaglomerular cells, which are smooth muscle cells found in the afferent arteriole, those are going to detect any change in blood pressure. And again, this apparatus is responsible for making renin and regulating that whole renin-angiotensin system that is going to lead to the increase in blood pressure if needed. Now, a little clinical application about the kidney and condition known as glomerulonephritis. Nephritis means the inflammation of the kidney. Glomerulonephritis means the inflammation of the glomeruli. And that could be either an acute process or a chronic process. In acute glomerulonephritis, the infection really doesn't usually start in the kidney. What happens is that a person has an infection elsewhere in the body. It's usually a strep throat infection. It usually happens about 2 to 3 weeks after a beta hemolytic streptococcus infection, which we technically get in the form of a strep throat that goes untreated with antibiotics. Okay, so the body is going to make antibodies against that streptococcus, and now we have an antigen-antibody complex circulating within the bloodstream. That immune complex can lodge in the kidneys and leading to blocking of the glomerulus. And that leads to, again, the acute glomerulonephritis. That is why a strep throat is extremely important to diagnose and treat with the full dose of 10 days of antibiotics and not stop it when the patient feels better in order to prevent the complication of acute glomerulonephritis. Chronic glomerulonephritis is more of a progressive disease that happens in chronic conditions like lupus, for example, where there is this progressive damage of the kidneys until the patient goes into renal failure. There is healing by fibrous tissue, which obviously is going to be scarring and damaging to the nephrons. Now in the next portion, we'll be talking about the whole process of urine formation.